Hey, Taylor. I happened to catch your text right as I finished my last Zoom session for the evening. It takes no effort whatsoever if I'm at my computer to whip out a real quick video, throw it on YouTube, send you the link. So feel free to send me all the questions you want. It'll just add to my video count on YouTube. When you sent me the question, I think you left the negative off of the 4 that was right there. I say that based on the way the questions normally are formatted in the section, so I'm going to assume that that's a 4 right there. There's really two things going on in this problem. Number one is dealing with the square roots. Number two is dealing with the aftermath. It all feels like aftermath after you've had math. But anyway, I want to focus on what happens here because I think this is where you made your initial mistake. You did correctly get the i's out of these, but what you didn't do correctly is when you did the square root, you didn't let go of it. What technically happens with the square root of negative 81 is this. Technically, what happens is you separate the 81 and the negative 1. Now, I wouldn't expect you to write all this. I'm just showing you all the gory details. But if you write negative 81 as 81 times negative 1, there's a rule that says you can split a square root across a multiplication as long as both numbers aren't negative, which they aren't. One of them is, but not both. And if I split this up, two things happen. Number one, when you do the square root of negative 1, by definition, this thing is equal to I. That's what I means. I means the answer to the square root of negative 1. So that's where the I comes from, which you did have in your answer. But the mistake that you made was when you did the square root of 81, it is 9. But the mistake that you made is you didn't let go of the square root. You kept the square root on top of it. But the answer to the square root of 81 is just plain old 9. So if you take off this square root right here, everything should fix itself. Now, in all practicality, I do expect you to be able to take a problem like this, where the number is a perfect square that you can square root, and instantly jump to this answer. But it's not wrong to show the intermediate steps. It's just not efficient because this is a skill going from the square root of negative 81 to just 9i that I would expect you to develop to the point where you can just answer that square root instantly. But getting back to the problem, and I'll just go to the next page to finish it. We had 2 times the square root of negative 81 plus 6 times the square root of what I think was negative 4. The square root of negative 81 is 9i. And the square root of negative 4 is 2i. You had made the same mistake with the square root of negative 4 on your work. You found the I, you said the square root of 4 is 2, but you didn't let go of the square root after you actually did it. There is a time where the square root lurks behind, just not in this problem. But getting back to this one, you still have 2 being multiplied, 6 being multiplied, and then the results being added. Order of operations says you multiply first. So if I multiply 2 times 9i, I get 18i. And if I multiply 6 times 2i, I get 12i. And then lastly, I add these, and since they're like terms, which means they have the same letters with the same powers, all I got to do is add 18 and 12 to get 30, but they're still i's. If I have 18 i's and I have 12 more i's, I still have i's, I just have more of them. So the mistake you were making was you were not letting go of the square root when you did the square of the number. Just to show you when you keep the square root, this is separate from this problem. But if you had something like the square root of negative 20. The thing with this one is I don't know the square root of 20. You can put in a calculator. It's 4.49 something, I think. So it's a messy decimal, which we don't resort to. But if you were to separate the 20 and the negative 1, I can do the square root of negative 1, but I can't do the square root of 20. Square root of negative 1 is I. However, when you have a square root that you can't do like 20, it's not uncommon to be able to split it into a multiplication problem. For example, 20 is 4 times 5. It's also 2 times 10. But the advantage of 4 times 5 is that if I split the square root of 20 into the square root of 4 times 5, I know the answer to the square root of 4. The answer to the square root of 4 is just 2. Now, I don't know the answer to the square root of 5. So that square root stays because it doesn't get done. The square root of 4 got done. That's why it's not a square root anymore. And of course, the I is just lurking there. And this is the exception to writing the I at the end. I never recommend writing an I after a square root because it's not clear whether or not it belongs inside of there. So there are some instances where you have a square root left over in your answer, but it's from when you are doing a square root of a number that can't be answered and therefore is still there in the answer. By contrast, something that you can square root like this 4, if you do a square root, it becomes its answer, but it's not a square root anymore. That was the obstacle that you were having on these two problems. You were leaving the square root over the 9 and the square root over the 2, and they shouldn't have been there. I hope this helps. Feel free to text me if you have any other questions. I like making short little quick videos like this. It takes no time at all.